Welcome to Old Testament History, Chapter 4, Session 4a, The Kingdoms and the Prophets, David, Part 4. Saul and Jonathan were dead, and the curtain was ascending upon the golden age of Israel. I've done my best so far to convey to you the essence of the Old Testament, but I apologize it's taking so long. However, I must do it justice by not only just giving the facts and reading content, but explaining it in the context of its broader themes to draw out the things that benefit us now in our day and time as well. But there's a big difference between what we Western culture folks understand when we read our translations and when an ancient Hebrew speaker and devout believer would have read it. Now, I say that, but I also exclude some of the modern Hebrew speakers who think they understand it better than anyone else today, for actually their understanding is tainted with as much tradition as our Roman Catholics. I'm sorry that speaking the truth makes enemies, but so be it. It also makes friends. And this far from the original, the only way to recover the heart and impact, and certainly the drama locked in these words, is to do word studies and to be spiritually sensitive to what and why and how things are said. And by the grace and mercy of God, I trust we're seeing some of that. But there is so much more here, which I must leave to those who follow. We now are at the inauguration of one of the defining ages of Israel. Its golden age, where the reigns of David and the first years of his son Solomon are the pinnacle of Israelite civilization. This chronicles the illustrious explosion of music and poetry, literature, invention, architecture, prestige, military prowess, and power, all birthed by an extraordinary individual, David. And while we tend to extol the extraordinary in other subjects, David truly was a genius of the heart. It is not very often in human history such gifted genetics come together to flash across our culture's consciousness, but much less that they are recognized and permitted to influence us to their greatest potential, and even less often when that impact is felt within their lifetimes. But this was David, musician, poet, prophet, man of war, man of God, and king. Please turn to 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass, after the death of Saul, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had abode 2 days in Ziklag, it came to pass on the third day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent and earth upon his head. And so it was, when he came to David, that he fell to the earth and did obeisance. And David said unto him, From whence comest thou? And he said unto him, Out of the camp of Israel am I escaped. And David said unto him, How went the matter? I pray thee, tell me. And he answered, That the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people also are fallen and dead, and Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also. And David said unto the young man that told him, How do you know that Saul and Jonathan his son are dead? And the young man that told him said, As I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me, and called unto me. And I answered, Here I am. And he said unto me, Who are you? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. And he said unto me again, Stand, I pray thee, upon me, and kill me, For anguish has come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. So Saul had tried to kill himself by falling on his sword, but it didn't kill him. And so he saw this Amalekite, and he asked the Amalekite to finish the job. Verse 10. So he says, so I stood upon him and killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after that he was fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head and the bracelet that was on his arm, and I brought them hither to my Lord, to you, David. Then David took hold on his clothes and rent them, and likewise all the men that were with him. And they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son. It was terrible news. And for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword. And David said unto the young man that told him, where are you from? And he answered, I am the son of a stranger, an Amalekite. And David said unto him, how wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And David called one of the young men and said, go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. And David said unto him, your blood be upon your head, for thy mouth has testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. See, David did not reward the Amalekite for killing Saul, his adversary. He executed him. Then David eloquently lamented in the dirge that I recited for you at the close of the last session. When I did that last week, that was from the Rotherham Emphasized Bible, which brings out the oratory aspect of the Hebrew in that passage. Now I'm going to give you the literal of that from the REV Bible, 2 Samuel 1:19. Your splendor, O Israel, is slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. Do not tell it in Gath. Do not proclaim it on the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew nor rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul no longer anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, Jonathan's bow did not turn back. Saul's sword did not return empty. Saul and Jonathan, those beloved and delightful. In their lives and in their death, they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and with other luxuries, who put ornaments of gold on your clothing. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Jonathan slain on your heights. I am distraught over you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very delightful to me. Your love to me was more wonderful than the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. That's how David felt about them. So pure-hearted. And then the REV commentary also has a note on this passage. Quote, Jonathan and David had a deep friendship for one another. This was a true friendship based on godliness, honor, mutual respect, and compatible abilities and desires. It is the kind of friendship that everyone longs for, but too few find. There was no jealousy, although there certainly could have been room for it, because Jonathan was the crown prince of the house of Saul. But he knew the will of God, that was David would be king, and he was good with that, which shows tremendous humility and submitting to the will of God. 1 Samuel 23:17. The Bible shows that Jonathan and David were very close. 1 Samuel 18:1-4, 19, 1 through 7, 20, 1 through 42, and 23, 15 through 18. And they made at least 3 covenants together. 1 Samuel 18:3, 20:16, and 23:18. Although it's been suggested by some, there is no hint of homosexual love in any of the records. David and Jonathan were comrades in arms. I agree 100% with that. And I have something more, even more to add. For David was known to have bared his soul to the masses, for he wrote the Psalms. So why wouldn't he let us know about this relationship with Jonathan too? Often, men of God are alone. Not that they don't have people all around them, but because of the depth of their callings, they're still alone. They have few else who truly understand the scope of the ministry that God has put in their hearts. Communicate it that they must, but for almost everyone with whom they interact, they can only seem to move them upward by increments. And as they gaze out upon the sea of faces to whom they must minister the calling and message, it's easy to think of them all the same and to be tempted to treat them all the same, but their people are not the same. Each believer has a joy to encourage, a pain to heal, and other needs. And if one has enough compassion, God will show that to them and what to do about it. And then they can really minister and change lives. And that takes work. It uses a lot of energy. It wears one out. Always pushing to be the best, endeavoring to help each person the most one can. Stay awake. Perceive. You're here to heal. And during the course of that, one occasionally finds someone who really understands. And that, for David, was Jonathan. For Jesus, it was Lazarus. How refreshing. Their personalities clicked. Yeah, Jesus had a personality too. He had likes and dislikes and favorites too. He was a human being, right? There was some sort of effortless understanding between them. Well, who wouldn't want to hang out with someone like that matches you? Now, David is guided to take the first steps now to lay claim to what Samuel prophesied, to lay the foundations for his kingdom, and that begins in chapter 2, verse 1. It came to pass after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah?" And the Lord said to him, "Go up." And David said, Where shall I go? And he said, Unto Hebron. So David went up hither, and his 2 wives also, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail Nabal's wife the Carmelite. And his men that were with him did David bring up, every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, that the men of Jabesh Gilead were they that buried Saul. So, now David's going to reach out to the other part of Israel, the followers of Saul. In verse 5, David sent messengers unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, and said unto them, Blessed be ye of the Lord, that you have showed this kindness unto your Lord, even unto Saul, and have buried him. And now the Lord show kindness and truth unto you, and I also will requite you this kindness, because you have done this thing. Therefore, now let your hands be strengthened, and be ye valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah have anointed me king over them. So, he was asking them, do you want to make me king too? Because everyone knew the prophecy of Samuel. But, verse 8, Abner the son of Ner, the captain of Saul's host, took Ishbosheth the son of Saul, and brought him over to Menahem, and made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, and over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. And the rest of chapter 2 records the battles between Judah and Israel that occurred, and their champions. Abner was Saul's champion, and Joab was David's champion. And one of the casualties in that war between the followers of Saul and the followers of David was Joab's brother, who had tried to kill Abner. But Abner, Saul's champion, outmatched him and killed him instead. And that started a blood feud between Joab, David's champion, and Abner, Saul's champion, which would affect things later for sure. Chapter 3, verse 1. It says, "Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. But David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker." Because I believe it was because David's men were seasoned warriors, having participated in many raids into the south. And of course, God was on their side too. But Saul's men were not as experienced. And because Chronicles covers parts of this same period, we can fill in some blanks with these battles. The exploits of David's mighty men are detailed in 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 10, all the way through chapter 12, verse 22. And also, they're chronicled in 2 Samuel 23, verses 8 through 39. Those sections actually are not chronological. They're reporting details in some incidents back when Saul was still alive. One famous incident is given in 1 Chronicles. Turn to 1 Chronicles 11, verse 15. 1 Chronicles 11, 15. It talked about all the different champions in David's army, and now 3 of the 30 captains went down to the rock to David into the cave of Adullam, and the host of the Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephaim. And David was then in the hold, and the Philistines' garrison was then at Bethlehem. And David longed and said, "Oh, that one would give me drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem that is at the gate." And the 3 brake through the host of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. But David would not drink of it, but poured it out to the Lord and said, "My God, forbid it me that I should do this thing. Shall I drink the blood of these men that have put their lives in jeopardy? For with the jeopardy of their lives they brought it." Therefore he would not drink it. These things did these 3 mightiest. Well, that was a snapshot of David. Wouldn't you want to fight for somebody like that? Now we rejoin 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 6. Came to pass, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner made himself strong for the house of Saul. And Saul had a concubine, whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Ahiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Wherefore hast thou gone in unto my father's concubine?" He had sex with his father's concubine after Saul was dead. Well, what did that mean? What could it mean? Well, Ishbosheth, Saul's son, suspected by doing that Abner was maneuvering one day to be king. Because one of the things that a king would do, a new king would take the concubines of the old king. So, verse 8. Abner was very wroth for the words of Ishbosheth, and said, Am I a dog's head, which against Judah do show kindness this day unto the house of Saul, and thy father to his brethren and to his friends, and have not delivered thee into the hand of David, that thou chargest me today with a fault concerning this woman? See, she was the king's concubine. She probably was very beautiful and desirable and lonely, and he took advantage of that. But, so, it wasn't his intent at all, it looks like, to try to be king. And so this offended him so much that in verse 9 he said, So do God Abner and more also, except as the Lord hath sworn to David, even so I do to him, to translate the kingdom from the house of Saul, to set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan even to Beersheba. Well, Dan is as far north as Israel went, and Beersheba is as far south as Israel went. So that meant that he'd get rid of Ishbosheth, right? Wow. Verse 11, And Ishbosheth, he could not answer Abner a word again, because he feared him. So, apparently it wasn't Abner's intention at all to become king. And Ishbosheth's accusation offended him, Abner, so much, he decided to switch allegiances to try to unify the kingdom under David. Now, there is some idiomatic language here that needs some explanation. That God do so to me, and more also, if XYZ happens, or if XYZ doesn't happen. That's oath language. It's a formulaic way to state a very serious promise. So, we're going to do a phrase study. The first occurrence of it that I found, there may be more, is in Ruth 1:17, where Ruth says, Where you die, will I die, and there will I be buried. She says this to Naomi. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. So it's oath language. 1 Samuel 14:44. And Saul answered, God do so more and also, for thou shalt surely die, Jonathan. So Saul swore that he was going to kill Jonathan. That's when the people saved Jonathan. Said, you ain't going to kill Jonathan. He was the hero of the battle. 1 Samuel 25:22. 1 Samuel 25:22. So and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave of all that pertain to him by the morning light any that piss against the wall. So David was making an oath that he was going to kill them all. 2 Samuel 3, verse 35. David swears, saying, So do God to me, and more also, if I taste bread or aught else till the sun be down. He said, I ain't going to eat nothing. I swear. 2 Samuel 19:13. And say ye to Amasa, Art thou not of my bone and of my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the position of Joab. So he made a promise. You're going to be my general, like in Joab's position. 1 Kings 2:23. 1 Kings 2:23. Then King Solomon sware by the Lord, saying, God do so to me, and more also, if Adonijah have not spoken this word against his own life. So he said, Adonijah, you're going to die. 1 Kings 19:2. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, So let the gods, plural, do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them, those dead prophets, by tomorrow about this time. See, Elijah had killed the 400 prophets of Baal when God lit the sacrifice. You remember that incident? And so Jezebel, the evil wife of King Ahab, said to Elijah, so let the gods do to me and more also if I ain't going to kill you like you killed them. Well, Elijah got away and she didn't do it. She got killed. 1 Kings 20:10. 1 Kings 20:10. And Ben-Hadad, that's the king of Syria, sent unto him and said, the gods do so unto me, and more also, if the dust of Samaria shall suffice for handfuls for all the people that follow me. He said, I got a whole big bunch of people following me. And then 2 Kings 6:31. 2 Kings 6:31. Then he said, God do so and more also to me, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shall stand upon him this day. So the king swore that he was going to kill Elisha, but it didn't happen either. So this is oath language. And Abner acted upon that vow that he was going to bring the kingdom away from Ishbosheth into the hands of David. He acted upon that vow because, similar to our culture, this was as serious as a triple dog dare. Once uttered, it had to be backed up with action. And if you didn't, you were a wimp. So he would follow through on what he swore. 2 Samuel 3:12. 2 Samuel 3:12. So here he's acting on it. And Abner sent messengers to David on his behalf, saying, whose is the land? Saying also, make thy league with me. And behold, my hand shall be with thee, to bring about all Israel unto thee. Now, this is crazy. This is unique, because David gets this message from the top general of Ishbosheth's army, the ones they've been fighting. Wow. And so David said, well, I will make a league with you, but I don't believe you. I need a guarantee. And so he said, but one thing I require of thee, and that is, you ain't going to see my face to talk any deals, but except you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when thou comest to see my face. Because remember, Michal, Saul's daughter, was David's first wife. And then with all the stuff going on between Saul and David, Saul took her away and gave her to somebody else. So he wants his first wife back. Verse 14. Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, deliver me my wife Michal, which I espoused to me for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. That was my dowry. David never divorced her. She was his first wife. Saul was the one that broke them up. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband. Wasn't a legal marriage, the second guy. Even from Phaltiel, the son of Laish. And her husband went with her along, weeping behind her, to Bahurim, about part way down to where David was. And then Abner said to him, go return. And he returned. So Abner did the guarantee, bringing Michal. So verse 17, and Abner had communication with the elders of Israel, saying, You sought for David in times past to be king over you. Now then do it. For the Lord has spoken to David, saying, by the hand of my servant David will I save my people Israel out of the hand of the Philistines and out of the hand of all their enemies. And Abner also spoke in the ears of Benjamin. And Abner also went also to speak in the ears of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel, and that seemed good to the whole house of Benjamin. So Abner came to David to Hebron, and 20 men with him. And David made Abner and the men that were with him a feast. Covenant assaults involved. And Abner said unto David, I will rise and go, and will gather all Israel unto my lord the king, that they may make a league with thee, and that thou mayest reign over all that thine heart desires. And David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. Wow. So here is the opposing general, comes down, makes this deal with David, has the covenant of salt at a meal, and David sends him back, and he's promising that he's going to unify Israel, all of Israel, under David. Wow. He went in peace because he was going to act as the emissary to join all the tribes under David. But there was one big problem, and that was there still was that blood feud between Abner and Joab, because Abner had killed Joab's brother, and Joab, David's top general, wanted revenge. Verse 22, and behold, the servants of David and Joab came from pursuing a troop and brought in great spoil with them. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he was gone in peace. So a few minutes later, after Abner leaves, Joab shows up. And when Joab and all the hosts that were with him were come, they told Joab, saying, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he has sent him away, and he's gone in peace. Then Joab came to the king and said, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why is that thou hast sent him away, and he's quite gone? You know Abner, the son of Ner. He's the general of the other army. That he came to deceive you, and to know thy going out and thy coming in, and to know all that thou doest. You see, he's spying on you. That idiom, go out and come in, that we covered recently, shows up here. Another way to look at it is that they go out of their house, and later they come back in. It's a figure employing opposites, implying everything that they did in between. And then it gives the literal right there in that very same verse. That right after that, go out and come in, the literal is to know all that thou doest. You see? So to go out and to come in means how they conducted their life in public. And Joab told David, Abner was spying on how you operate. Verse 26. And when Joab was come out from David, he sent messengers after Abner, which brought him again from the well of Sirah. But David knew it not. See, Abner had just left, so he wasn't very far. So that's why the messengers could catch up with him. Verse 27. And when Abner was returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him quietly, and smote him there under the fifth rib, that he died for the blood of Ashiel his brother. So here is Abner going to make a deal with all the rest of the elders of Israel to bring the kingdom back to David, and Joab kills him. That private affair put the whole public deal to unify the kingdom in jeopardy. Verse 28. And afterward, when David heard it, he said, I and my kingdom are guiltless before the Lord forever from the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. Because now this is going to even complicate factors even more. Because if people up north distrusted David at all, now they have even more cause to distrust him. He killed Abner, let it rest on the head of Joab, David said, and all on his father's house. And let there not fail from the house of Joab one that has an issue, or that is a leper, or that leans on a staff, or that falls on the sword, or that lacks bread. That's a curse if you ever heard one. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, slew Abner because he had slain their brother Asahel at Gibeon in battle, the blood feud. Verse 31, and David said to Joab and all the people that were with him, rend your clothes, gird you with sackcloth, and mourn before Abner. And Joab had to do it, even though he didn't want to. David said, you better. And the king David followed the bier. David even followed the coffin. And David had to publicly and greatly mourn Abner to show that he had nothing to do with his death. Else the deal to unify Israel might fall apart. David really had to walk in wisdom. Verse 32, and they buried Abner in Hebron. The king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner. And all the people wept. And the king lamented over Abner and said, died Abner as a fool dies. His hands were not bound, nor his feet put in fetters, as a man falls before wicked men, so fellest thou. And all the people wept again over him. He didn't die a hero. And when all the people came to cause David to eat meat, while it was yet day, David swore, saying, so do God to me and more also. There's that oath language. If I taste bread or aught else, till sun be down. See, he had to really show that he had no part in the death of Abner. And all the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, as whatsoever the king did pleased all the people. For all the people in all Israel understood that day that it was not of the king to slay Abner the son of Ner. And the king said to his servants, know ye not that there is a prince and a great man fallen this day in Israel? And I am this day weak, though anointed king. And these men, Joab and etc., the sons of Zeruiah, that's Joab and his brothers, be too cruel for me. The Lord shall reward the doer of evil according to this wickedness. Because Joab had put his revenge above the affairs of state. And when Saul's son heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, his hands were feeble, and all the Israelites were troubled. But then there's even more intrigue, which threatened to upset David's efforts to unify Israel. Because two men, hoping to please David, conspired and killed Ishbosheth, Saul's son, king of Israel. And they cut off his head and brought it to David, thinking that David would reward them. But David was trying to win the other tribes in a positive way, not by subterfuge. Therefore, he had the two men that killed Ishbosheth executed to prove that he was no part of that either. Chapter 4, verse 12 of 2 Samuel. And David commanded his young men, and they slew them, and cut off their hands and their feet, and hanged them up over the pool in Hebron, in public. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the sepulchre of Abner in Hebron. This, when he cut off their hands and their feet and hung them up over the pool, This was a public show of utter rejection. He desecrated their corpses. That was radical. Their hands had carried out the evil deed. They were cut off. And their feet had gotten them there to do it, and they were cut off. Chapter 5, verse 1. Then came all the tribes of Israel to David, to Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. He had walked in wisdom throughout all those challenges. And in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that led us out and brought us in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. So he led out and brought in. He exercised leadership. They remembered that. Chapter 5, verse 3. So all the leaders of Israel, the elders of Israel, came to the king, to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. David had overcome all the attempts of the adversary to kill him, to take his wives, to weaken him, to prevent him from ruling a unified Israel, because it was obvious that Israel would prosper with one so capable and full of integrity as David. But David walked in wisdom and overcame all the roadblocks cast in his way, and now he commences to build his kingdom. This also is the point at which there's another dual record of events. One record in Samuel and Kings portrays events from a secular point of view, and the other in Chronicles records many of the same events from a spiritual point of view. We were taught that this is called narrative development or scripture buildup. The accounts don't contradict, they interleave. And this dual record begins in 1 Corinthians 10, after the genealogical chapters, with the account of Saul and his sons' deaths in verses 1 through 12, which matches the 1 Samuel 31 account. But then, Chronicles adds more facts, which are spiritual in nature. Look at 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verse 13. 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verse 13. So Saul died for his transgression, which he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord, which he kept not, and also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar spirit, to inquire of it, and inquire not of the Lord. Therefore he slew him, and turned the kingdom unto David, the son of Jesse. So that gives more information that was not in Samuel, and you see that Chronicles gives the spiritual viewpoint, the spiritual consequences. The dual record then fills in more details missing from the 2 Samuel account of his ascension over the rest of the tribes as king. Chapter 11, verse 1 of 2 Samuel. Then all Israel gathered themselves to David unto Hebron, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. And moreover, in time past, this is actually from Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 11:1. And moreover, in time past, even when Saul was king, thou wast he that led us out and brought us into Israel. And the Lord thy God said unto thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be ruler over my people Israel. That's the same as in Samuel. But verse 3, Therefore came all the elders of Israel to the king in Hebron, And David made a covenant with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. And then Chronicles adds the spiritual reason, according to the word of the Lord by Samuel. So that's added info from a spiritual perspective. But now, for David, there is something that must be done. There's one glaring error, one gaping wound which needs to be dealt with first, and that was Jerusalem, the walled city of the Jebusites. Throughout all the time of the book of Judges, Jerusalem was in the hands of pagans, the Jebusites, and the Israelites coexisted with them because Jerusalem's walls were so strong. Joshua had instructed them to mop up after the war of conquest of the Promised Land, but no one had completed that job. So, 2 Samuel chapter 5 verse 6 continues. 2 Samuel chapter 5 verse 6. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem unto the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, which spoke unto David, saying, Except you take away the blind and the lame, you shall not come in here. Thinking, David can't come in there. The Jebusites were so confident that their 23-foot thick walls could protect them, that they told David that if he could take away the blind and the lame defenders, then maybe he'd have a chance to take the city. That is, it was the largest fortress in Canaan, and it was so well protected, they said even blind and lame fighters could defend it. 1 Chronicles 11:6. 1 Chronicles 11:6 is next chronologically. And David said, Whosoever smites the Jebusites first shall be chief and captain. So, who wants to be the top general secretary of war in the new kingdom, the combined Israel? So Joab, the son of Zeruiah, went first up and was chief. So Joab kept his position. He was the first when David was in Hebron, but he also retained it over the unified kingdom. And 2 Samuel says how he did it. So 1 Chronicles 11:6 says, whoever smites it first will be the chief captain. And then 2 Samuel 5:8 says how Joab did it. Joab knew that there was a secret way into the city. 2 Samuel 5:8. And David said on that day, whosoever gets up the gutter and smites the Jebusites and the lame and the blind that are hated of David's soul, he shall be chief and captain. Wherefore they said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. Now, the REV commentary has a note that I'm going to read to you. Quote, the Jebusite city was built on the south end of Mount Zion, and its main water source was the Gihon Spring, a spring on the southeast end of the city, just outside the city wall. The Jebusites had a shaft leading down from their city to the spring, and Joab used that shaft to gain access to the city and conquer it. Now, this is very interesting because they didn't think that anyone could get up that shaft because it was a vertical climb. I'm now going to read to you from the Bible as History by Werner Keller, pages 208 to 210. In the romantic manner in which the stoutly guarded stronghold of Jerusalem fell into David's hands was brought to light last century partly by chance and partly by the scouting proclivities of a British Army captain. On the east side of Jerusalem, where the rock slopes down into the Kidron Valley, lies Ain Siti Mariam, the Fountain of the Virgin Mary is what they call it. In the Old Testament, it's called Gihon, that is, bubbler. And it has always been the main water supply for the inhabitants of the city. The road to it goes past the remains of a small mosque and into a vault. 30 steps lead down into a little basin in which the pure water from the heart of the rock is gathered. In 1867, Captain Warren, in company with a crowd of pilgrims, visited the famous spring, which, according to legend, is the place where Mary washed the swaddling clothes of her little son. Well, I don't know about that. Despite the semi-darkness, Warren noticed on this visit a dark cavity in the roof, a few yards above the spot where the water flowed out of the rock. Apparently no one had ever noticed this before, because when Warren asked about it, nobody could tell him anything. Filled with curiosity, he went back to the Virgin's Fountain the next day, equipped with a ladder and a long rope. He had no idea that an adventurous and somewhat perilous quest lay ahead of him. Behind the spring, a narrow shaft led off at first horizontally and then straight up into the rock. Warren was an alpine expert and well acquainted with the type of chimney climbing. Carefully, hand over hand, he made his way upward. After about 40 feet, the shaft suddenly came to an end. Feeling his way in the darkness, Warren eventually found a narrow passage. Crawling on all fours, he followed it. A number of steps had been cut in the rock. After some time, he saw ahead of him a glimmering of light. He reached a vaulted chamber, which contained nothing but old jars and glass bottles covered with dust. He forced himself through a chink in the rock and found himself in broad daylight in the middle of the city, with the fountain lying far below him. Closer investigation by Parker, who in 1910 went from the United Kingdom under the auspices of the Palestine Exploration Fund, showed that this remarkable arrangement dated from the 2nd millennium BC. The inhabitants of Old Jerusalem had been at pains to cut a corridor through the rock in order that in time of siege they could reach in safety the spring that meant life or death to them. Warren's curiosity had discovered the way which, 3,000 years earlier, David had used to take the fortress of Jerusalem by surprise. David's scouts must have known about the secret passage, as we now can see from a biblical reference that it was previously obscure. David said, quote, "Whoever gets up the gutter and smites the Jebusites." So the authorized version translation of gutter is the Hebrew word sindor, which means shaft or channel. So Joab climbed up that chimney 40 feet 3,000 years ago, snuck into the city and opened the city gates, and that's how Jerusalem fell. Wow. So, including Warren's shaft, there are as many as 8 tunnels now carved into the rock in that area, widening pre-existing fissures. One that was built later is called Hezekiah's Tunnel. That's over 500 meters long. That's described in 2 Chronicles 32. So I'm going to give you some handouts in PDF form that will show you diagrams and pictures. So, 1 Chronicles 11:8. David dwelt in a castle, therefore they called it the city of David. And he built the city round about, even from Millo round about. And Joab repaired the rest of the city. David grew greater and greater, for the Lord of hosts was with him. So, now, the small town boy from the quintessential small town, Bethlehem, now will become the big town king of the capital of Israel. The city of David was a portion of Jerusalem which was rediscovered in 1995. It took 17 years to fully excavate, and then it was opened to the public in 2014. And now the City of David portion is a national park in Israel. 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 17. But when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines came up to seek David. And David heard of it, went down into the hold. And the Philistines also came and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up unto the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into mine hand? And the Lord said to David, Go up, I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into your hand. And David came to Baal Perazim, and David smote them there, and said, The Lord hath broken forth upon mine enemies before me as the breach of waters. Therefore he called the name of that place Baal Perazim. And there they left their images, and David and these men burned them. So the Philistines had brought their gods with them to the battle, and they lost, and they left them there, and so David burned them. Chapter 5, verse 22 of 2 Samuel. And the Philistines came yet up again, and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, Thou shalt not go up, but fetch a compass behind them, and come upon them over against the mulberry trees. And let it be, when you hear the sound of a marching in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then thou shalt bestir thyself, for then shall the Lord go out before thee to smite the host of the Philistines. So God was calling in the angelic reinforcements. They were marching in the sky, and God was sending his troops to aid the battle. Wow. And David did so, and the Lord commanded him, and he smote the Philistines from Geba until thou come to Gazer. So these were the foundations of the Golden Age. First, taking Jerusalem. Next, defeating the Philistines. Here's more of the foundation, which were the spiritual preparations. In 2 Samuel 6 and 1 Chronicles 13, it talks about David trying to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. So 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 1, David gathered together all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people that were with him from the battle of Judah to bring up from thence the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, that dwells between the cherubims. And they set the ark of God on a new cart, and brought it out of the house of Abinadab that was in Gibeah, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drave the new cart. So they were the sons of the surviving priest Abinadab. Chapter 6, verse 4, And they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was at Gibeah, accompanying the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel played before the Lord on all manner of instruments made of fir wood, even on harps and on psalteries, on timbrels, on coronets, and on cymbals. And when they came to Nashon threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God, and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error. And there he died by the ark of God. He wasn't supposed to touch it, and it was shaken, and he touched it. And David was displeased because the Lord had made a breach upon Uzzah, and he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day. And David was afraid of the Lord that day, and said, How shall the ark of the Lord come to me? So David would not remove the ark of the Lord unto him into the city of David, but David carried it inside into the house of Obed-Dedom the Gittite, And the ark of the Lord continued in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. See, the ark doesn't need any help. God watches over it. Uzzah didn't let God take care of the ark. He had to give it human help. Well, that put a quick end to the celebration. It's like what happened to that football player recently that had that heart attack on the field. They stopped the game. Well, 3 months later, 1 Chronicles 15 resumes David's parade of the ark that comes into town, because they saw that Obed-Edom's place was blessed. So that was a good signal. Chapter 6, verse 12. It was told King David, saying, The Lord hath blessed the house of Obed-Edom, and all that pertains to him, because of the ark of God. So David went, brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. And it was so that when they bare the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed oxen and fatlings. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was girded with a linen ephod. He didn't have his king's clothes on him. Verse 15, So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord. And she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And as soon as David had made an end of offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And he dealt among all the people, even among the whole multitude of Israel, as well as to the women as men, to every one, a cake of bread, and a good piece of flesh, and a flagon of wine. Oh, they partied. So all the people departed, every one to his house. Then David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, How glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. And David said to Michal, It was before the Lord, which chose me before your father, and before all his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore I am going to play before the Lord, and I will yet be more vile than this, and I will be base in mine own sight, and of the maidservants which thou hast spoken of. Of them shall I be had in honor. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child unto the day of her death. Woe Nelly. So we're going to finish up with the account in 1 Chronicles 16. 1 Chronicles 16. This is another viewpoint of that same event. Chapter 16, verse 1. They brought the ark of God and set it in the midst of the tent that David had pitched for it. And they offered burnt sacrifices and peace offerings before God. And when David had made an end of offering the burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord. And he dealt to every one of Israel, both man and woman, to every one a loaf of bread, a good piece of flesh, and a flagon of wine. And he appointed certain of the Levites to minister before the ark of the Lord, and to record, and to thank and praise the Lord God of Israel. Asaph the chief, and next to him Zeruiah, Jeiel, and Shemariamoth, and Jehiel, and Mattaniah, and Eliab, and Benaniah, and Obed-Edom, and Jeiel, with psalteries and with harps. But Asaph made a sound with cymbals, and Benaniah also, and Jehaziel the priests, with trumpets, continually before the ark of the covenant of God. Verse 7. Then, on that day, David delivered first this psalm to thank the Lord into the hand of Asaph and his brethren. So David gave Asaph and his brethren, the musicians, a psalm that he had written. And then it gives the psalm later in Chronicles. Now, this connection with the Psalms is very revealing. I'm going to quote from the REV commentary. Quote, this psalm of praise, which covers 1 Chronicles 16, 8 through 36, is very similar to parts of other psalms. For example, 1 Chronicles 16, 8 through 22 is almost identical to Psalm 105, 1 through 15. Then 1 Chronicles 16, verse 23 through 33, the next section, is very similar to Psalm 96. Then 1 Chronicles 16, 35 and 36 is very similar to Psalm 106, 47 and 48. And 1 Chronicles 16:34 is the only verse in the Psalm of Praise in 1 Chronicles 16 that does not parallel another psalm. Yet, what it says, to give thanks to Yahweh and that His covenant faithfulness endures forever, is a common theme in the Bible. Unquote. So, in this session, I've introduced the facet of biblical research called narrative development or scripture buildup. That's made possible because Samuel and Chronicles cover the same events from different perspectives. We have the same opportunity with the four Gospels and also with other sections of the Old Testament between the prophets, books, Kings, and Chronicles. But now there is one more exciting opportunity to see the events of the Old Testament from a unique perspective, and it is introduced here by 1 Chronicles 16:7, and that is the concurrence of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles with the Psalms. David was composing Psalms at the same time as the events that we have covered. This is a perfect segue to Ren's teaching, which will follow after we take a break. So, bless you.